She called herself a widow and offered cider, supper, and a place to rest. But the woman who hunted and killed black slaves did far more than anyone in town dared imagine. A quiet house straddles the muddy border, where boots vanish at the door and no one sees the children leave. Then a flood splits open the ground behind her smokehouse, and what rises from the cellar is not just bone, but evidence. Shackles rusted to wood, a ledger marked in code. How many were sold, and how many are still buried beneath Cannon's Rest? If you would like me to continue creating stories so that this history, which is not taught in schools, is not forgotten, please subscribe to this channel. The sharp rap at Dr. Wren's back door cut through the pre-dawn stillness. He lifted his head from the medical text he'd fallen asleep reading. The lamp beside him burned down to a weak flame. Another knock, more insistent this time. Wren gathered his worn cotton robe around his shoulders and made his way through the dark house, his cavalry wound making each step on the cold floorboards a careful negotiation. The March wind whistled through the doorframe as he approached. "Who calls at this hour?" he asked, one hand on the latch. "Got a sick boy needs tending," came the reply, clipped and impatient. Wren opened the door to find a lean white man in road-dusted clothes, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Behind him stood a black youth, perhaps 14, barefoot despite the bitter cold. The boy's arms were wrapped tightly around his chest, his thin cotton shirt providing little protection against the wind. "Took ill on the road," the man explained, though he kept his distance from the boy. "Fever, I expect." Wren ushered them into his examination room, lighting fresh lamps as the man settled into the corner chair, hat still firmly in place. The boy remained standing, silent, eyes fixed on the floor. "Your name, sir?" Wren asked, reaching for his ledger. "Smith," the man said shortly. "Just passing through." Wren made a non-committal sound as he opened to a fresh page. He approached the boy, who flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. The skin was cool, not feverish, and the pulse rapid but steady. As Wren checked the throat for inflammation, his fingers brushed against a fresh laceration near the collarbone, partially hidden by the shirt collar. "This wound," Wren said carefully. "How did it occur?" "Caught himself on a wagon bolt," the man answered quickly. "Clumsy thing." The cut was clean-edged, more like a knife slice than a tear. Wren made careful note of its location and shape in his ledger, along with the boy's approximate age and condition. When he looked up to ask another question, the man was already standing. "Need to be on our way by first light," he said, dropping 2 worn coins on the table. "Just fix him up quick." Wren cleaned and dressed the wound, pressing a small packet of willow bark powder into the boy's hand with instructions for tea. The child's fingers were ice cold, and he never spoke a word. As they left, Wren noticed the man's hand gripping the boy's upper arm, steering him through the door. The next morning, Wren found the willow bark packet unopened on his back step. In his ledger, he wrote in his precise hand, "March 24th, 1850. Transient youth, unaccompanied departure. Faded scar noted below right clavicle, 2 inches in length. No fever present, despite complaint." He spent the morning penning a letter to Sheriff Cotter in Georgetown, including a careful tracing of the scar's distinctive pattern and noting his concerns about the boy's condition and the man's behavior. But when he rode into Bridgeville to post it, he found the causeway flooded from the spring rains. The mail wagon wouldn't run for at least 2 days. Wren tucked the sealed letter into his coat pocket, the image of the boy's silent face and cold hands haunting him as he turned his horse toward home. The morning fog clung to the muddy road as Sheriff's Deputy Nathaniel Cotter guided his horse past the Laurel town limits. His worn leather satchel held a letter that had arrived that morning, the careful handwriting of Reverend Marcus Johnson from the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Wilmington, describing a missing family. Samuel Diggs. 2 sons. 1 daughter, expected in Baltimore over a week ago. Cotter pulled his coat tighter against the damp March air. Missing persons reports weren't uncommon, especially involving colored travelers, but something in the preacher's precise details nagged at him. Diggs had carried papers proving his free status, had money for grain, and knew these roads from previous trips. The first stable master in Bridgeville remembered them. Quiet man, well-spoken. Bought feed. Wednesday last week. In Seaford, a shopkeeper recalled selling bread to a young girl in a blue calico dress, but it was at Hearn's feed store, just north of Reliance, that Cotter's interest sharpened. "Colored fellow with 3 young ones," old man Hearn scratched his beard. "Came through Thursday morning, bought grain, asked after the road to Baltimore." He pointed west, told him to follow the creek down past Cannon's Rest. Better water for the horses there. Cannon's Rest, Cotter's jaw tightened. The whitewashed house straddling the Delaware-Maryland line belonged to Patty Cannon, a widow known for her sharp trading and sharper tongue. She kept to herself mostly, though she'd hosted his men during last autumn's manhunt, feeding them well and asking no questions. The watering trough lay in a small clearing just beyond her property. Cotter dismounted, scanning the churned earth for signs of recent traffic. The morning sun had burned away some fog, revealing wagon ruts leading off toward a stand of bare trees. Something caught his eye in the brush, a flash of fabric against dark wood. He pushed aside the brambles to find an old wagon wheel, partially buried in mud. Tangled in its rusted spokes was a child's hair ribbon, once white but now dirt-stained. Cotter worked it free carefully, turning it over in his calloused hands. There, stitched in neat blue thread, the letters S.D. He stood for a long moment, staring at the ribbon. The property line between Delaware and Maryland ran somewhere through these trees. To search properly, he'd need permission from both county courts. And to question Patty Cannon, that would require more than a dirty ribbon and second-hand tales of travelers passing through. Back in his office, Cotter drafted a notice to the Cambridge courthouse. Inquiry regarding Samuel Diggs and family, 3 children, freedmen travelers, from Wilmington. Last seen Thursday, March 21st, near Reliance. Any information on their arrival or passage through Maryland appreciated. Reply care of Sussex County Sheriff's Office, Delaware. He sealed the envelope, trying to ignore the memory of that ribbon caught in the wheel's rusted teeth, like something torn away in haste. The first rays of dawn filtered through the chapel's clouded windows as Reverend Tobias Laird prepared for sunrise service. The small wooden church in Vienna sat empty still, its rough-hewn pews awaiting the faithful. He moved methodically, lighting candles and arranging his worn Bible, the floorboards creaking beneath his careful steps. The offering box, a simple pine container near the entrance, needed emptying before the congregation arrived. Laird inserted the iron key, its familiar grinding sound echoing in the quiet sanctuary. Among the expected coins and folded papers lay something unexpected. A child's bonnet, once white, but now dulled by wear and weather. He lifted it carefully, noting the quality of the stitching despite its aged condition. In the growing morning light, he could make out 3 letters embroidered in faded blue thread. L.R.D. The bonnet felt heavy with significance, though he couldn't immediately say why. Later that morning, as his mixed congregation filed out after service, Sarah Wells, who cleaned at Cannon's Rest, lingered behind. "Reverend," she whispered, her eyes darting to ensure privacy. "I saw a girl on Miss Cannon's porch Thursday last. Little thing in a blue dress. Miss Patty rushed her inside when she saw me coming up the road. Laird's fingers traced the embroidered initials again. "Did you hear a name?" "No, sir." But she looked lost somehow. Out of place. By noon, 3 other parishioners had shared similar accounts. Brief glimpses of a black girl at Canon's Rest, always quickly ushered from view. Each telling added weight to the bonnet in Laird's study. He penned a letter to Reverend Johnson at Wilmington's Zion Chapel, describing the bonnet and requesting confirmation of the initials. The response arrived faster than expected. The letters matched Louisa Rachel Diggs, Samuel's youngest. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Canon's Rest when Laird arrived. Patty Cannon met him on the porch, her steel-grey hair pulled tight, wearing her usual black dress despite the spring warmth. "A niece's child," she explained smoothly, offering him tea he didn't accept. "Visiting from Dover. Left Thursday with her mother. Her eyes never wavered, her hand steady as she arranged her shawl. So many travelers these days, Reverend." Hard to keep track. Laird noted how recently swept the porch was, how the windows gleamed. Everything in its place, except for the truth. Without official authority or clear evidence of wrongdoing, he could only listen and observe. But that evening, he carefully wrapped the bonnet in clean linen and drafted a detailed letter to the Sussex County Court, recording every account he'd gathered. "Found in church offering box, March 31st, 1850, he wrote. "Believed belonging to Louisa Rachel Diggs, missing child of Samuel Diggs, freedman of Wilmington. Multiple witnesses attest to seeing a girl matching her description at Canon's Rest property. The package left Vienna the next morning by post. 2 weeks later, a clerk's notation appeared in the Sussex County records. Item received. Child's bonnet. Testimony filed pending review. But spring floods had overwhelmed the court's attention, and like so many other mysteries along the Maryland-Delaware border, the bonnet and its implications slipped beneath more pressing concerns. Through it all, Patty Cannon continued serving travelers, her whitewashed house standing sentinel between 2 states, its secrets held as tight as her grey hair. The April evening settled heavy and damp over Canon's Rest, its whitewashed walls turning grey in the gathering darkness. Deacon Elam Brodie guided his horse along the muddy track, the animal's hooves making wet, sucking sounds with each careful step. The 2-story house stood like a pale ghost against the darkening tree line. A single lamp burning in an upstairs window. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Brodie dismounted, his joints stiff from the long ride from Cambridge. The front porch boards creaked beneath his feet as he approached the door, brass knocker cold against his knuckles. "Evening blessings," he called out, rapping twice more. The door opened just enough to reveal Patty Cannon's thin frame, her black dress blending with the shadows behind her. "We're full tonight, Deacon," she said, though no other horses stood in the yard. No wagon tracks marked the mud. "Surely you have space for a man of the cloth?" Brodie adjusted his collar, rain beginning to spot his coat. "I've coin to pay, and I'm happy to share quarters." "Not tonight." Cannon's voice remained steady, but her fingers tightened on the doorframe. "Try Seaford. Only 4 miles north." Brodie noted the absence of movement inside. No shuffle of servants, no clink of dishes being cleared, no murmur of other guests. For a house known to lodge travelers, it stood unnaturally still. "I'd heard you keep help," he said, stepping back as thunder cracked closer. "Young, Samuel at the crossroads mentioned your kitchen usually has hands to spare." Something shifted in Cannon's expression, a tightening around the eyes perhaps, or a slight straightening of her spine. "They've gone to visit kin. Easter season, you understand." Lightning flickered, and in that instant Brodie caught movement behind her, a shadow crossing the hall's far wall. The shape seemed too small for an adult. "Of course," he said, but remained on the porch, rain now falling steadily. "Might I at least water my horse?" "The storm's nearly here. Pump's broken." The lie came smooth and practiced. "Creek's just past the tree line." Brody led his horse around the side of the house, ostensibly toward the creek. In the growing dark, a pale light caught his attention. Candlelight through a rear window, moving low to the ground. He glimpsed floorboards lifted, the edge of what appeared to be a cellar door, before a curtain drew shut with decisive force. That night, sheltered in a barn 2 miles north, Brody penned a letter to his brother Thomas, the Seaford postmaster. "Something's amiss at Cannon's Rest. House too quiet, help all gone despite fresh swept floors and warm bread smell. Saw cellar door through window, unusual placement for storage. Miss Cannon claims full house but no guests visible. Recommend inquiry." He sealed the letter and added it to his saddlebag, planning to post it himself the next morning. But Brody never reached Seaford. 3 days later, a trapper found his body in the marshy Hope Creek, tangled in river weeds. The local coroner, noting the storm's violence and the creek's swollen banks, ruled it a tragic accident, another victim of spring floods and treacherous roads. Thomas Brody filed his brother's last letter in the postmaster's desk, marking it simply "unconfirmed suspicions," and added it to the growing stack of similar reports that never seemed to find their way to official investigation. At Cannon's Rest, the lamp burned in the upstairs window for 3 more nights, then went dark. The April morning brought a raw chill to Cannon's Rest, as Tommy Webb, barely 12 and already 3 years into his chimney sweep apprenticeship, stood shivering in the thin sunlight. His Uncle Jacob checked the ropes and brushes one final time before helping Tommy into his soot-stained work clothes. "Mind the damper," Jacob called up as Tommy began his climb. "Miss Cannon burns green wood sometimes. Makes for nasty build-up." The chimney's interior felt tight and cramped, brick rough against Tommy's palms as he worked his way down. Soot rained around him, coating his face despite the cloth tied across his nose and mouth. The hearth below gaped like a black mouth. His brush caught on something near the bottom. Not the usual creosote build-up, but different. Metal. Tommy worked his fingers into the gap between 2 bricks, feeling the edge of what seemed to be a loose mortar joint. "Uncle Jake," he called out, voice muffled by the chimney walls. "There's something stuck." "Work it loose if you can," Jacob replied from below. "Might be a bird's nest." Tommy wiggled the brick, and a folded scrap of paper, charred at the edges but mostly intact, fell into his palm. Even through the soot staining his fingers, he could make out neat columns of marks and letters. The descent took longer than usual, Tommy keeping one hand pressed tight against his chest where he'd tucked the paper. When he finally emerged, covered in black dust but clutching his find, Jacob was alone in the parlor. Miss Cannon had gone to check her chicken coop. "Look here," Tommy whispered, carefully unfolding the scrap. The paper was yellowed with age and smoke, but the ink remained clear enough to read. Columns of careful tally marks marched down one side, while abbreviated notes filled the other. 2M, 1F, Will, and below that, sold, G. Jacob's weathered face grew still as he studied the fragment. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Behind the hearth brick, wedged up high." Tommy pointed to the spot. "Like someone tried to burn it, but it got stuck instead." "Put it in my coat pocket," Jacob said quietly, "and finish the sweep proper. Don't mention this to Miss Cannon." They completed their work in silence, Jacob checking twice to ensure no traces remained of their discovery. Miss Cannon paid them their usual fee, $3 and a loaf of fresh bread, and saw them to the gate. That afternoon, Jacob Webb walked the 4 miles to Seaford, the paper burning a hole in his pocket. Sheriff Cotter was at his desk when Jacob entered, sorting through the week's notices. "Found something might interest you," Jacob said, laying the scorched fragment on the desk. "Tommy pulled it from Cannon's chimney this morning." Cotter studied the paper, his tobacco-stained fingers tracing the neat columns. "Will," he muttered. "Wilmington, most likely. And these numbers." He opened his ledger, comparing dates. "Match missing persons reports. Everyone." "Thought you should know," Jacob said. "Been hearing things about that place for years. Never had proof before." Cotter nodded slowly. "This helps, Jacob. But Georgetown wants more than burnt paper and whispers before they'll let us search proper." He carefully folded the fragment into his ledger. Could be enough to convince Judge Malden in Easton, though. He's been watching that border crossing since the Diggs case. "Just mind Tommy's name stays out of it," Jacob said. "Boys got to work these parts." "No names," Cotter agreed, "but I'll need your statement, official-like." "Can you come by tomorrow?" Jacob nodded, and they both understood what wasn't said, how Miss Cannon's hospitality could turn cold, how accidents happened on dark roads. The rain had fallen for 3 days straight, turning the roads to soup and flooding the low places near Marshy Hope Creek. By Sunday evening, the storm's fury finally broke, leaving behind a transformed landscape of fallen, branches and deep puddles that reflected the clearing sky. Behind Cannon's Rest, where the smokehouse stood dark against the twilight, the saturated ground had given way. Water carved channels through the packed earth, exposing old timber and darker soil beneath. The property lay quiet, save for the steady drip of water from eaves and trees. Monday morning brought Theodore Mills and his friends, racing after his father's escaped pig through the wet grass. The animal led them on a winding chase past the smokehouse, where fresh erosion had opened a gaping wound in the earth. Theo's foot caught on something hard as he ran. Not a root or stone, but something smooth and round that rolled when kicked. "Hey!" he called to the others. "Look at this!" The boys gathered around what at first appeared to be a dirty ball, half buried in mud. But as Theo scraped away the wet earth, his fingers traced the unmistakable curve of an eye socket. The hollow stare of a human skull emerged from the muck. "Don't touch it!" Samuel Ricker grabbed Theo's arm. That ain't right." Beside the skull, partially exposed by the rushing water, a heavy iron shackle jutted from rotted boards, the remains of what looked to be a collapsed root cellar. The rusty metal still held its chain, disappearing into the dark earth below. Within an hour, Sheriff Cotter arrived with Dr. Wren, who knelt carefully in the mud to examine their discovery. His thin fingers moved methodically over the bone, measuring and noting every detail in his leather-bound journal. "Adult skull," Wren announced, adjusting his spectacles as he worked. "And here, see this depression near the temple?" Consistent with blunt force. Not natural causes. He pointed to darkened marks along the bone's surface. "These indicate it's been in the ground at least a year. Possibly 2. More people arrived as word spread, forming a half-circle of grim faces around the excavation. Reverend Laird stood among them, his Bible clutched tight against his chest. "The Lord brings all things to light," he murmured, though few seemed comforted by the words. By afternoon, the Georgetown Courier's editor had arrived, scratching rapid notes as Cotter directed his deputies to secure the scene. The story would run in tomorrow's edition, spreading across county lines to both Delaware and Maryland papers. Dr. Wren continued his examination, revealing a second skull deeper in the exposed earth. "Female," he noted quietly. "Similar age and timing." His pencil moved steadily across the page, recording each grim detail with clinical precision. As dusk approached, Cotter sent a deputy to question Miss Cannon about the cellar. The house stood dark and still, the front door unlocked. Inside, they found a cold hearth and an empty bed. The widow's shawl and walking stick were gone, along with a small carpet bag that usually sat beside her dresser. "She's run," Cotter said, studying the undisturbed dust on her Bible. "Question is, who warned her?" The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Telegraph office in Seaford's been busy today." News travels fast. Through the gathering darkness, lanterns bobbed like fireflies as the search continued. More bones emerged from the muddy earth, along with chains that told their own terrible story. And still the water dripped, carrying away more soil with each drop, revealing what had laid hidden for so long beneath Cannon's Rest. Sarah Mallory's morning routine never varied. At dawn, she swept the meeting-house steps, checked the water barrel, and set out fresh bread for any travelers seeking refuge. The September air felt crisp against her face as she worked, her plain grey dress barely rustling in the morning stillness. A soft thump behind the building broke her concentration. Sarah set down her broom, listening. Another sound, like someone dragging something heavy across packed earth. "Hello?" she called, walking carefully around the corner. "Is someone there?" The sight stopped her cold. A boy, no more than 9 or 10, lay crumpled against the whitewashed wall. His clothes hung in tatters, and an iron shackle bound his right ankle, the broken chain trailing behind him like a dead snake. His skin was light enough to pass for white at first glance, but Sarah recognized the careful way he held himself, even in collapse. The wariness of someone used to being hunted. "Child," she whispered, approaching slowly with open hands. "You're safe here. I promise you that." His eyes flickered open, fever-bright and terrified. "She'll find me," he rasped. "Mrs. always finds us." Sarah knelt beside him, noting the raw marks on his wrists and ankles. "No one will harm you here. This is a Quaker house." She touched his forehead, burning hot. "Let me help you inside." The boy tried to stand, but stumbled. Sarah caught him, feeling every rib beneath his thin shirt. Together they made their way into the meeting-house's back room, where she kept a cot for emergencies. As she helped him lie down, something glinted at his neck. A silver locket on a frayed ribbon. "Can you tell me your name?" she asked, bringing water and a clean cloth. He shook his head, clutching the locket. "Mrs. called me boy, or thing." His voice cracked. "Before that, I had a different name. Mama gave it to me." Sarah began cleaning his wounds, keeping her movements slow and gentle. "Where were you held?" "Under the house." He shuddered. "There's a tunnel behind the smokehouse. She keeps us there until the men come with money." His fingers worked nervously at the locket's clasp. Others, too. I could hear them crying through the floor at night. Sarah retrieved her writing box, spreading paper on a small table. Every detail mattered now. "Can you tell me about the house? About this Mrs.?" The boy's story spilled out in fragments. Bitter bread laced with something that made them sleep. A wooden cage. The sound of coins changing hands in the night. He described a white-haired woman who quoted scripture while counting money, who kept a ledger of sales hidden beneath her floorboards. "She was sleeping when I got loose," he whispered. "The chain was rusty where the water came in." I ran all night. Sarah's pen scratched steadily, recording every word. When he finished, she sealed the pages and called young Thomas Wheeler, her fastest courier. "Take this directly to Judge Malden in Georgetown. Ride hard." The boy had fallen into an exhausted sleep. Sarah carefully untied the locket from his neck, noting the inscription inside. To E.P. from Mama. Another piece of evidence. Another name to restore. She wrapped the locket in clean linen and wrote a second letter, this one bound for the courthouse. Whatever happened next, this child's testimony would not be lost. His truth would be heard. Outside, hoofbeats faded as Thomas galloped east toward Georgetown. Sarah returned to her patient, settling into a chair beside the cot. She opened her worn Bible to Psalms and began her vigil, watching the morning light creep across the floor while the boy slept on, finally safe. The afternoon sun beat down on Easton's dusty main street as telegraph operator Morris Jenkins tapped out Judge Malden's bulletin. Inside the Cross Keys Tavern, the regular crowd gathered to escape the heat, nursing warm ale and trading gossip about the morning's news. "Listen here," called out Benjamin Wade, the tavern keeper, unfolding the fresh bulletin. "Warning to all stations. Seek widow traveling alone, age 60 to 70. Steel gray hair, riding dappled mare with white right foreleg. Subject wanted for questioning in Reliance murders. Approach with extreme caution." Wade's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the paper. Just yesterday, he'd served cider to an old woman matching that exact description. She'd sat quietly in the corner, wrapped in a black shawl despite the warmth, watching the door. "That mare," said John Cooper, the farrier's apprentice, setting down his mug. "Matthew just shod one like that this morning. Widow said she was heading to Norfolk for her sister's funeral." Wade wiped his hands on his apron. "Did she pay with coin?" "Tried to trade a brooch first," Cooper replied. "Gold with pearls." Matthew wouldn't take it. The tavern fell silent as the implications sank in. Wade moved quickly to his back office, where he kept a logbook of suspicious transactions, a habit from his days as a customs agent. He'd noted the woman's odd manner, the way she'd refused to remove her gloves while eating. "Someone fetch Constable Pierce," Wade called out. "And send word to Matthew. Which way was she headed?" "South Road toward Vienna," Cooper answered. "Can't be more than 4 hours ahead." Matthew Drake, the blacksmith, was already mounting his horse when the message reached him. The mare's distinctive gait and the widow's cold eyes had troubled him all morning. Now he knew why. He rode hard toward Vienna, the fresh-forged shoes in his saddlebag clicking with each gallop. At the Vienna courthouse, Constable James Pierce received Drake's breathless report just as a second telegraph arrived from Salisbury. The suspect had been spotted at a way station near the Pocomoka River. "She's trying for the ferry," Pierce realized, gathering his deputies. "If she crosses into Virginia..." They rode through the afternoon heat. 5 men fanned out along the river road. Near sunset, they spotted her at the ferry landing, a thin figure in black arguing with the ferryman over passage. "I've only this trinket to trade," they heard her say, holding out something that caught the dying light. "Surely it's worth a simple crossing?" Pierce recognized the item instantly. A child's brooch, silver with blue stones. He'd seen its twin in the Georgetown evidence log just yesterday. "Patty Cannon," he called out, drawing his pistol. "Step away from the water." She turned slowly, her face a mask of practiced innocence. "Why, Constable Pierce, I'm just a poor widow seeking passage." "Then you won't mind explaining what's in that carpet bag of yours?" Her hand tightened on the bag's leather strap. For a moment, Pierce thought she might run. But where? The river stretched wide and dark behind her, and deputies now blocked both shoreline paths. "I know my rights," she said softly, still clutching the brooch. "A woman alone deserves protection in her travels." "And children deserve protection from monsters," Pierce replied, motioning his men forward. "You're bound for Dover, Mrs. Cannon. Judge Malden wants to discuss those bodies in your cellar." They took her without resistance, though her steel-grey eyes never lowered. The carpet bag yielded its grim inventory: a bound ledger, 2 brooches, and a child's bonnet, faded blue with the initials LRD carefully stitched in the band. The Dover courthouse's oak benches groaned under the weight of spectators that September morning. Dr. Absalom Wren sat in the front row, his leather ledger balanced on his knees, each page marked with careful strips of linen. Beside him, Reverend Laird clutched a stack of baptismal records, their edges worn from constant reference. The air hung thick with late summer heat as Judge Malden called the first witness. Sarah Mallory approached the bench, her Quaker grey dress stark against the mahogany rail. She spoke in clear, measured tones about the boy she'd found, his shackled ankle, the fever that nearly took him, his whispered accounts of the cellar. He mentioned others, Sarah testified, hands clasped tight, children who disappeared in the night. He heard them through the floorboards, then they'd go quiet. Dr. Wren followed, presenting his medical logs. March 24th, 1850. Unnamed Negro youth, brought after nightfall. Laceration near collarbone, inconsistent with reported fever. Patient vanished by morning. He adjusted his spectacles, pointing to similar entries stretching back 18 months. Throughout the morning, parents from Wilmington and Dover approached the bench. Each carried some precious record: a school attendance sheet, a church membership roll, a daguerreotype of a smiling child. Rebecca Turner, clutching her son's primer book, identified his handwriting on a scrap of paper found in the cellar wall. Patty Cannon sat unmoved, her iron-grey hair severe against her black dress. She watched each witness with unblinking eyes, sometimes mouthing words to herself, as if in prayer. Near noon, the clerk presented the recovered ledger. Its entries, written in Cannon's precise hand, told a damning story. April 15th. 2 boys, ex-Wilm, sold south $175, and May 22nd, girl-child Dover, butler pays $200. Each notation matched a disappearance, each price tag a missing face. When Reverend Laird matched his baptismal records against the ledger's dates, the pattern emerged. Under the guise of apprenticeships, Cannon and her late husband had spent years trafficking freed black children southward. The network stretched from Delaware to Baltimore, with coded references to buyers in Virginia and beyond. The defendant may address the court, Judge Malden announced, as the evidence concluded. Cannon rose slowly, her shackles clinking in the hushed room. "I confess to 8, she said, her voice soft but clear. "The others were business, fair trade in willing labor. Ask Dr. W., ask Butler in Baltimore. They'll speak to my character." But when pressed for details, she fell silent. The torn pages from her ledger, referring to Dr. W. and C. Butler, Bemore, remained mysteries. No such persons came forward. The next morning, before sentencing could be passed, the jailer found Cannon still in her bed, cold to the touch. A small vial, smelling of bitter almonds, was discovered sewn into her shawl's hem. Dr. Wren, called to examine the body, noted signs of stroke in his report, though whispers of suicide or vengeful justice spread through Dover's streets. The court clerk filed the case as closed, but Sarah Mallory noted in her diary that night, 30 children still missing, 30 families still searching. The truth lies buried with her, or perhaps in those missing pages, wherever they may be.